Great. Well, we are kicking off and welcome everybody to our fifth Professionals with a PhD webinar. Thanks so much for joining us today. And I'm here joined with Sally Purcell, HDR Professional Skills Manager. Do you want to say hi, Sally?
Hello. Hello, Sally.
And I'm the HDR Industry Engagement and Placements Manager in HDR Training and Partnerships. And we're delighted today to be joined by Dr. Ross Hill in Research Services. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you. I'll share my screen with you all. Just only got about, I think, 5 or 6 slides, but it will prompt me.
Thanks, Ross. While you're doing that, I may just do our acknowledgement of country.
Sure.
I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Watamatagal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the dream time. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. So, if you'd like to kick off, Ross, thanks so much for joining us today. We're really delighted to have you here, and thanks so much for spending the time with us to share your insights as a professional working in Macquarie with a PhD. So, yeah, you can go ahead there.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Catherine. And thanks to you and Sally also for the invitation to talk. It's really great to have this opportunity to think back of all the things I've done over my career and work out how I got to where I am today. It's certainly not what I planned. I had a very different plan, but I thought I'd talk through that plan, but also the timeline of when I did my degrees and then jobs after that, to sort of give you an insight on what I had hoped to do, and then sort of tangents that happened along the way. So I completed my PhD in 2008. Prior to that, I did an undergraduate course in environmental biology with first class honours at UTS. And from the honours, it was a really great transition, an easy transition into the PhD for me. It was with the same mentor, same supervisor, who I've really got along very well with, was really interested and excited about the types of research that we were doing. And I was able to really become quite independent in the types of work I was doing. So at the time, it was all about coral reefs. I was working on coral bleaching. I spent a lot of my time up on Heron Island on the Great Barrier Reef, sometimes One Tree Island, and also did a lot of work back in the lab at UTS over those years. So once I finished my PhD, in those final few 6 months or so, I took the 3.5 years of the PhD. I took that extra half year. And in that last 6 months, I really started thinking, okay, what am I going to do? I now need to get myself a job. What do I actually see my career as becoming? And something which I'm sure all of you have experienced is that most of your mentors, most of your supervisors only really know academia. They've gone through the usual academic process of completing a PhD, postdocs, and then getting an ongoing continuing position somewhere. So the opportunities I found for engaging with people who knew about what else was out there, for me at that time, was almost non-existent. And I think that's really changed now through this type of thing that Sally and Catherine are putting on to describe the other types of opportunities. But for me at the time, it was an academic life was the only thing that anybody did. If you're to do a PhD, then why would you do anything else? Was the type of mentality. So I was lucky enough to get a 3-month postdoc after the submission of my PhD. So I submitted, waiting for assessor comments to come back. And in that 3-month period, I did a 6-week voyage to Antarctica on a research vessel, the Aurora Australis, which is an icebreaker. And so I spent a week in 10-metre swells on the way down to Antarctica. Everybody was sick, except for the crew, thankfully. And then after that week of torture, we entered the ice, and we had a month of going through the ice. And each day we'd get off and we'd take samples of, I was working on sea ice algae, so the algae that lives on the bottom of sea ice, and we'd take samples and run a whole bunch of experiments looking at how climate change is influencing the base of the food chain in Antarctica. It was an incredible experience. I think the picture that you used to promote this session was one of me with a penguin, and they would literally walk right up to you, emperor penguins about 1 metre tall, and just look at you and wonder what the hell you are, having never seen a human. So that was a great opportunity for me and something which really inspired me to continue in research. So I came back after that trip away. The assessment comments from my PhD had come back. I resubmitted and then graduated in 2008. During that period as well, I was applying for other postdocs. I was applying for some overseas and some within Australia, and I was lucky enough to get a Chancellor's postdoc at UTS. So at this stage, I'd done undergrad honours, PhD, and now starting a 4-year postdoc all at UTS, which is great. It meant I knew exactly how everything worked at the university. I knew all the people. I could easily start the research straight away without any sort of time setting up a new lab. So I spent 4 years doing a postdoctoral position there. It was 75% research, 25% teaching. So it enabled me to get that extra 4th year over the standard 3-year type of postdoc. And that research was, again, mostly tropical, and I do a lot of field research. It's also at that time when I began to get experience in supervising students, so honours and PhD students. There was no real master's program of research at UTS at that time. So I had a number of students I'd supervise and was responsible for mentoring through to completion. Then I was coming to the end of that postdoc and I thought, all right, what next? The opportunities for staying at UTS are almost non-existent. At that time, budgets were an issue, but also an issue which I had known about, but had kind of pretended not for it to be an issue, was diversifying my experience in other research groups. So I'd done everything at UTS. And so I really needed to move if I wanted to broaden my horizons, which was completely understandable, but it's a scary thing to do. If you've worked all your life at that stage, I think it was probably about 10 years at UTS or more actually. It was all I knew in terms of research and work environment. So I thought, all right, it's time to move. So I applied for a few other postdocs, some overseas, some elsewhere in Australia and different states. And also a Vice Chancellor's postdoc at UNSW, which I was lucky enough to get. So that was a 3-year postdoc, which I did from 2012 to 2014. It was great. It forced me to learn new things. It was a GO8, which is a whole different experience, such a different environment. Having now seen how Macquarie works compared to UTS, compared to UNSW, and I know a lot of people at Sydney Uni, the difference between the GO8s and non-GO8s, it's quite substantial in terms of how competitive they are internally. What I found at Macquarie is that everybody is really keen to help everybody, and it's not as a competitive environment, so it's quite different. So I was at UNSW learning new techniques, working with people I hadn't worked with before, and bringing a whole bunch of skills to their team, which was a gap. So I was able to work on a whole range of different projects that were new. It was all about temperate reefs this time. So I was scuba diving a couple of times every week around Sydney, up and down the coast. And while that might sound fairly glamorous, after doing it for 3 years, throughout the whole year, in the middle of winter in very cold water, underwater for 2 hours at a time, even through a wetsuit, you become numb from the waist down pretty quickly. So the glamour of it wears off. So I was coming to the end of the 3 years, and again, I was thinking, all right, what do I want to do? Do I want to stay in research? Knowing that it's a really tough gig, not only to get a postdoc, but even more difficult to get a permanent position. But also knowing if I was successful in getting either of those things, knowing the pressures that you're under was a little overwhelming for me at that time. Knowing that the amount of publications you would have to have, the amount of grant income from external sources you'd need to have, and the number of students you need to supervise to be competitive with your peers at that career stage was just a bit overwhelming for me. So that's the point when I decided to look beyond academia as a career choice. And so I made a big move, and it was out of academia completely. So it's the role I'm currently in. It's my 6th year here at Macquarie as a research development manager. I love it. It is a fantastic role in that it allows me to work with researchers from every discipline of the university and help them in generating research income. So I provide advice to create high quality grant applications to external funders. One of the things I hated most about being an academic was having to apply for grants and the pressure and the impact a rejection would have on you was huge. If any of you have submitted journal articles or manuscripts for publication, and if you've experienced what a rejection is like, that first one is really tough. You take it very personally. It does take a toll on you. And if any of you have experienced applying for any grants, large grants, especially ones which will change your career, and especially those with salaries, getting rejected from those is something that really takes a toll. Even seasoned academics that I talk to regularly today who have been in their field for 20 years, a rejection from a government funding agency really hurts. So it was this process that sort of helped drive me out of academia, but here I am now providing the advice to researchers on how to do it. So one of the great things I was able to bring from my knowledge of being a researcher and having a PhD was that pressure, knowing what researchers experience on a daily basis and not underestimating the impacts that rejections on research grants and publications can have. So part of what I do is help them, give them resilience, give them ways to make sure that the ideas that they have can be used for future types of research applications. So I'll talk through now some of the things that I do in this role. So I've been here for 6 years. It's fantastic because it's a really autonomous type of role. There's two of my positions at the university. So I work on all research that is non-medical. And then my colleague, Courtney Bendel, she works on all research that is medical. So that division of research means that I work on everything on all four faculties of the university. So in a single day, I can be working on a research grant in archaeology and history, and then another one on economics, another in engineering and science, where I have my background, and then another from psychology or linguistics. And it's great because I get to see what all the great ideas researchers have, and I help them in achieving their goals in terms of trying to attract external funding. In addition to that, I provide advice to them on how to build their careers in terms of developing a track record to reach a stage or something they aspire to. So if they want to be eligible for a promotion to the next academic level, then I can give them some advice on what they might need to think about doing in the next year or two to actually achieve that. So these are the types of things I do on a daily basis. I've broken them up from years to 6 months, 4 months, 1 month, and days prior to someone submitting a grant. So my world really revolves around grant timelines. I predominantly work on grant schemes from the Australian Research Council. There's I think about 10 or 12 different schemes the ARC runs. I work on the majority of them. Each year we would put in 300 of these types of grants. An average length of a grant would be about 100 pages. So I read a lot of them. I provide advice through many different mediums, either through workshops like this, in person, reading applications and providing written feedback, and then also advice to faculties and the officers that support them. So to give you an idea on other things I do, long-term type goals I have to help people is build their career, help them identify ways to build their track record. And what I mean by that is, for example, publications and where they aim to publish. So it's important to have a high number of publications. It's important to have a high number of quality publications. it's important to have you as a first author on many of those to demonstrate you were leading that project. So these are the things that people really need to be able to demonstrate when it comes to asking a funder for money. But you need to have the track record before you reach that stage. So I give advice on how that can be built up to be competitive. I give them advice on building collaborations. In the ARC schemes that I mentioned before, almost all of them ask about how you're going to advance international collaborations. The ARC really wants to see ways that you as a researcher can bring new skills to Australia. And one way of doing that is by working with people overseas and learning their skills and bringing them back to Australia. I help researchers identify grant opportunities. There's thousands every year from many different funders. It's difficult to find the right one sometimes for a particular person and their particular idea, but that's a challenge that we all have. And the funding that they can apply for, it doesn't have to be through grants. They could be working with industry. They could have an industry partner who is really interested in the type of research that they're doing, wants to be to have some type of investment in the outcomes from that research, and they would be often very happy to put at the beginning some small money in to help build the idea and get some ideas on whether it's feasible. And then later on, years down the track, sometimes they really put in large chunks of cash to support projects, hundreds of thousands of dollars sometimes. So in that, in about the 6-month period prior to someone putting in a grant, I would work with faculties to put together writing groups. Sometimes it's really something that early career researchers benefit from, working with your peers to see what's a good way of pitching an idea or writing or communicating your idea. And doing that in groups is often beneficial, and I help facilitate those. We run drop-in clinics where people pop in to see us and they ask us questions, so they don't have to book it in necessarily. We'll just be in a particular location at a particular time, and if they've got anything they want to run by us, they can do so. Helping researchers figure out the best time to apply. This is a really tricky one. So for you guys as PhD candidates, if you're in the final year, now is probably the time you're going to want to be thinking about fellowships. That's the avenue that you want to take. It's absolutely only one of many, which I'm sure you've heard about through this series. In my job, I help people identify those types of opportunities. So I really work with staff. So I identify for staff at all levels what type of grants they can apply for and the best time to do it. So thinking about their track record, if they've got a whole bunch of publications in the pipeline, not yet published, then maybe next round is the best time to go. I also manage the Successful Grants Library, which staff can access. It's a great resource which has about 75% of grants that have been funded included. It's not a requirement for staff to approve the inclusion of their grants in the library, but as I said, that 75% do. And it is a resource for researchers at the university to see how past applications in the same scheme have been pitched, how they've been formatted to help them be successful. Also give them advice on demonstrating that a project is feasible. So collecting preliminary data can show proof of concept. About 4 months prior to a grant going in, I'll begin a series of workshops. If any of you are interested in the DECRA scheme, the Discovery Early Career Research Reward scheme that the ARC manages, it's something I work on closely. We usually have about 40 applications that go in through the university each year, and I work closely with all of them in developing their applications. And that begins with a series of workshops. And I run 5 different workshops based on each of the different parts that go into a large DECRA application. I provide resources like advice toolkits. So for many of the major ARC funding schemes, I put together a document that provides strategic advice on each each section of the application. So if you've seen what a grant application might look like, whether it be an ARC grant application or others, sometimes there's really tricky questions that really make you think hard about what you plan to do and what your outcomes will be and what the benefits of those outcomes will be beyond benefits to your discipline. So you really need to think big picture. The ARC has become really focused on ensuring researchers convincingly describe how their project will make benefits to the Australian community. That means the taxpayers who are funding for these grants, how are they going to benefit? And every grant that goes in needs to make an argument as to how it will provide that type of benefit. So doing that, thinking about your research from that big picture perspective is often difficult, so I provide advice on how to do that. There's also budget calculators, which I put together. They're Excel spreadsheets, which help with doing some of the calculations automatically, because it can be a little daunting when putting together grants that are a few $100,000 in size. I run one-on-one meetings with researchers. I manage expressions of interests, so EOIs, which we do for the fellowships, and NOIs, which are notifications of intent for staff already at the university who are thinking about applying for grants. If you're thinking about the DECRA scheme, for example, in your future, there is an expression of interest form which you need to complete. It's closed for the round that is currently open, but if you're thinking about it for the future, do have a look at Macquarie's DECRA page. If you just Google MQ DECRA, it'll pop up, and you can see what that expression of interest form looks like. About 1 month prior to a grant going in, this is when I provide written strategic advice. And it's a really stressful time, not just for the researchers, but also for us managing these grants and managing these researchers because of the volume. In the Discovery Projects scheme, we have over 100 applications from the university each year. It's impossible for me to read them all. So that's why we have the fantastic faculty research officers who contribute to a lot of that work as well. I provide other types of feedback on applications. Often researchers have further questions and like to meet or chat over the phone. I negotiate the types of co-funding, so the cash contributions that the university will put into supporting a grant. That's important to demonstrate that the university is really committed to an idea, and the more money that a university puts in means that less money needs to be requested from the funder, which helps demonstrate cost effectiveness and value for money, which are often an important criteria for funders. Then days before a submission, I would go into providing rapid advice as quickly as possible over the phone or whoever that it's needed. Advice and confirmations to faculties and departments to get approvals on submissions, and then working with the compliance team, which is within the larger team that I work in. There's kind of an idea on things I do day to day. So some challenges and rewards. I'll start with the challenges. So there's many, as in any job. I really enjoy my job. I am glad I made the change from academia into professional staff. It was a difficult choice to make. It was an unknown whether or not I'd like it. It was a career change. It really meant that if I do make this move out of academia, I only have a year or two maximum before I could jump back. Because in that time, my track record would decline because I wouldn't be publishing as much and I wouldn't have the interactions or the collaborations ongoing. So that change was a big challenge. Considering all the options I had, I decided to go ahead, and it has paid off. It's definitely something I now enjoy. So currently, the type of challenges is keeping up to date with the different funding opportunities. There's a lot of them. Identifying the right ones for the right people and the right projects can be tricky. So this strategic advice I provide, as I mentioned, I work across all 4 faculties, and I can work in just about any discipline. But I don't have the expert knowledge outside of what I did my PhD in. So biological sciences, marine sciences, I have a good understanding. But as soon as you go outside of that, even into other broader avenues of science, I don't have training. So I don't have training in the business or economic side of things, in any of the arts, and very little in the medical side of things. So a challenge is to be able to use my knowledge to provide advice that is useful to a researcher that's in a discipline I know nothing about, but provided in a way that is useful to them. So what I've found is that you don't actually need to have a strong understanding of a discipline that someone's working in. If they're studying the history of a particular war, for example, or looking at some archaeological ruins in the Blue Mountains, I know nothing about those things, but reading a grant application, I can see where the weaknesses are. I can identify places where they haven't made a convincing or compelling case. I can identify particular parts of the plan doesn't align with their research strengths or their publication track record. I can't really comment on the methods, but everything else, which is the majority of the grant, you can really contribute to. Meeting the deadlines, so a huge volume of work and really in peaks throughout the year. So there's peaks that are coming up in a month or two, and they'll go through till about March, and then it dies down a little and picks up again. So it's on this cycle. A tricky part of my job is to help researchers maintain their resilience. Given success rates are so low, it can be really demoralizing. For scholarships, they can be as low as 15%. For some larger projects, it can be as high as 40%. But it always means that more people than not will be unsuccessful. So managing and helping researchers through those difficult times when they haven't had any funding is a challenge. And the university has some really aspirational goals for achieving some large numbers in external research income. Part of my job is to help research reach those goals, but that is a challenge. Then looking at the rewards. So these, for me, are the reasons why I love my job. It's helping researchers achieve their research goals. When a researcher does get funded, that you can be part of the excitement that they experience is wonderful. It's great to see how thankful they are for the contributions I make. Not that and the reason they got funded, but I helped them up through the process, which is really a real big reward. Working across a diverse number of fields, so I'm no longer working underwater every day of the week. I'm now, well, not in the water at all. I certainly don't miss it after having done it for so long, but I am able to work across so many different fields. It's always different every day. It's great to be part of the discovery and innovation process and see how different disciplines do it. Everyone is different, but seeing those discoveries and seeing how they advance their field is really exciting. And last one is using my expertise to help Macquarie reach its strategic objectives, of which there are many. And the university has a new operating plan, and so a lot of my work is going into trying to achieve those goals. I think this is the last slide, which I'll quickly run through. So how do I measure the impact of what I do? How do I know that the people that I work for, my clients or the stakeholders, are actually happy with the work I do? So I run these workshops. So currently I'm up to my third workshop in the current DECRA round. I usually get about 30 people come along to those of the 40 people that generally apply each round. I do a series of surveys at the end of each major grant round to researchers. They're anonymous, so they can say exactly what they want. I don't know who they are, and I don't ask questions to try and find out, because I really want anonymous feedback so that it's as honest as possible. And questions I ask them are around the quality, quantity of workshops, the other types of advice that I give, and the other types of resources available to them, and how they can be improved. So constant improvement of the resources we provide is important. So the advice toolkits I mentioned and budget calculators and the templates I provide for all the different funding schemes. How are they used? Researchers liking them? Can they be improved? The Successful Grants Library I mentioned, it is a wonderful resource that we've now been able to get online. Previously, prior to about 2 years ago, it was all hard copy, and researchers would have to come into research services to look at them and read them in our office. The reason being that we can't email them out, these grants, because they belong to these researchers. It's their ideas. If we email them out, there's no way of controlling how far they could go. So what we were able to do is put together an online Successful Grants Library, which once you log into, the software that researchers use allows them to only view the text. So they open a PDF through a Citrix window on their computer, and they can't copy, download, print, email the document at all. They can only read it on their screen. So that's enabled us to allow this library to go much further and be much more useful to many people, even when working from home, so they connect through the VPN. How impactful is my work in terms of its speed, value, clarity, consistency, and the strategic advice and feedback I have? It's something I collect through those surveys each year. How researchers and other stakeholders rate my overall performance. That's something which I can get either anecdotally or through those surveys as well. Generally, I get about 200 responses to the surveys I put out each year, so it's a really useful way and accurate way to try and gauge my performance. Of course, a big measure of impact is how much external research comes into the university on the schemes I work on. And lastly, readership of Research Spotlight. So you may not see it because it is only sent to staff around the university who are involved in research, but each month myself and my colleague Courtney, who I mentioned, we put out the Research Spotlight newsletter, similar to the HTR newsletter that you would all receive. But this one is about staff around the university and their achievements. So it's something I put out each month, and we can collect data on how many people open it, what links they click on, and all sorts of different metrics. So this is my last slide, sorry. So how is my PhD useful in my current role? So hopefully you can see all those little things around the circle in the center. But these are all the ways that my PhD helps. You, after completing a PhD, will be a fantastic critical thinker. You'll no longer just take anything you're told at face value. You'll always critique it in some way. That means you're going to be a great problem solver. You will be able to innovate and come up with new ideas by critically thinking about what's been done in the past. And that is a skill that is transferable to many different employers. Having completed a PhD, you will know the research process. You will understand the structures and processes within a university, which are very complex, which I'm sure you've experienced, but they're there for a reason and they work. There's always room for improvement, but they are there for a reason. So having that knowledge through a PhD is essential for any future job that you might want to have at a university, whether it be academic or professional staff. Almost always a question in an interview will be, or at least in the selection criteria that you answer in the job application, will be something about your knowledge of the Australian university sector. And having a PhD, you're going to have a great insight into that. You are going to know all about research funding pathways. Hopefully you are applying for a few small grants at least during a PhD. I highly recommend you do that. You will understand the pressures that researchers face. It's not something you would understand until you face it yourself. It would be difficult for me to do my job without knowing that. Having experienced it myself, it would be difficult to be able to put yourself in those stressful situations which you will experience. The importance of collaborations and building them, how to create relationships in a professional environment is very useful. Selling a track record. So you'll know through writing the thesis and then hopefully those grants I hope you're applying for, even small ones, you have to sell yourself. That's something that is difficult to do the first few times for many people. Working out a way to make yourself sound good without sounding arrogant. It's tricky, but it's a skill that you will need to have. for all sorts of different parts of your life. Working out what it takes to be successful in a university type of research degree is a very useful piece of knowledge to have. And the last thing is that having a PhD gives you so much credibility. You will be seen as someone who has gone through the hard yards, that you've done the hardest thing, the hardest degree there is, you've completed it and successfully, and you are an expert in a particular area. There's no one else who knows more about your area than you in the world. So that's really something that gives you a lot of credibility. So I suggest at this point in your careers, map out potential career pathways. There's many beyond academia. Talk to your mentors, not just your supervisor, but think mentors more broadly. Identify if there's people out there who are working in roles that you think you might like. Contact them. I've been contacted by researchers who are currently postdocs, and they've found me on LinkedIn, and they've said, "Oh, Russ, I saw your LinkedIn profile. I saw you're a postdoc, and I was surprised that your academic career didn't continue. I'm on that precipice of making a similar decision. How did you make that decision? How did you make it work?" And I'm very happy to have those conversations with people. So don't feel like you can't reach out to people like that yourself. So I think most people are almost always very happy to have those conversations to help you through those difficult decisions. And last point, never too early to plan your future. It can be a bit daunting, but it's never too early. So that's it from me. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Ross. That was fantastic. I've got such a great insight into your role, and I could it was so comprehensive. Thanks so much. I've got loads of little questions here, but I'm really happy for our participants, our attendees today, to step in and feed in their questions. And you can turn on your mics if you like and ask Ross directly, or you can put them in the chat as we speak. But yeah, amazing. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
One of the things that really stood out to me was the rejections and having to help people, I suppose, in terms of resilience. How do you feel you add value in that respect?
Yeah, great question. It is such a difficult thing to do because it really does affect people's often sense of worth, that they've put months, if not years of effort into this idea. They've submitted it to a funder, and the funder's gone, no, don't love it. And sometimes in many schemes you get a little bit of feedback. The ARC gives you percentile bands. So for each of the assessment criteria and your application overall, it'll give you a band. So are you in the top 10% of unsuccessfuls, 10 to 25, or 25 to 50, and so on, down to the bottom 25%. And no one submits a grant thinking it's going to get rejected. Otherwise, why would you bother? So if you get in that bottom 25%, it is really heartbreaking. You've been told by your peers that you're in the bottom 25% of grants submitted in that round, and there's no easy way to sugarcoat that. So what I try to do to help researchers is work with them soon after those outcomes, give them a bit of time to sort of process it, and because everybody responds differently. Some people are really resilient automatically and go, oh, that's life. It was a 15% success rate. I would have been lucky to get it. Other people really do take it very to heart and contemplate just giving up. And I completely understand that feeling. So working with them closely soon after these outcomes to sort of see if there's anybody out there who does need a bit more assistance and support, and giving them ideas on ways forward. So no grant can only be submitted once. If you're not funded, then submit it elsewhere. There's almost always another avenue. You can use the feedback that you get. Often you do get some written feedback, especially from some assessors that comes through. And you can identify some weaknesses that were picked up on by experts in your field. And then you can talk to the candidate who applied and work through it and see if there are ways that type of feedback could be incorporated into a future submission. And just really making sure that they have mentorship in their, good mentorship in their research group. It was something I really benefited from in some of my academic roles, and something I really missed in others. In one of my positions, it was almost absent entirely, which really affected my ideas on what I could do. So good mentorship, making sure they have it.
Awesome. Yeah, fantastic. I suppose it's good to know everybody as an academic is feeling some level of rejection along the way. You're not totally alone. But yeah, it's not something as a professional is there anything comparable, do you think, in that way to what you do now, I suppose, in terms of rejection? I suppose we have a very different promotion track. You know, we have to apply for the jobs when they're vacant for the most part, unless they're hidden and somebody taps us on the shoulder, which is rare in the university world, I find. Anything you could say that, because they just seem to be totally different career tracks in terms of rejection.
They really are in many ways. So although I work with academics, I'm not an academic myself, and I don't do the research myself anymore. I don't really miss it, to be honest. I really enjoyed it while I did it. That's not something I overly miss, for reasons such as the rejection that is so frequent, whether it be for a grant or a publication. And your skin does get thicker over time, but at the first grant that you rejected really takes a toll. So comparing that to the job I'm in now, to be honest, there's nothing that feels as awful as a rejection in this role. I absolutely share in the disappointment that researchers experience. So in the discovery project rounds, for example, we submit over 100, we'd be lucky to get 25. So that means 75 people, 75 projects were unsuccessful. On a project, you could have between 1 and up to 10 people sometimes. So that's hundreds of people that have been told, no, you're not getting money, you're not good enough. So I share in that disappointment, but it's by no means as personal as it is when your name's on that grant.
Can I ask a question there, which I jotted down, and it's following on from that. So, it's really funny listening to talk, because apart from all the grant stuff, there's similar aspects of our job, because we're helping people believe in themselves. Yes, they've got things to offer. They need to write job applications. Again, I don't have to be an expert, Catherine, in all the jobs. We just have to look at the arguments, similar sort of thing, yourself. But with that resilience, and again, I work with a lot of people don't get jobs, so then we have to help build them up again, get them back out there. How did you learn the skills to help people with their resilience? Because that is a big part of your job, because you just told us the percentages. So yeah, how did you learn that, and where's that confidence in being able to support people in that way?
I didn't know that was going to be part of my job when I started 6 years ago. I guess thinking about it, it's an obvious part. You're there to support researchers. Most researchers are going to be rejected on grants. It wasn't something I thought about, certainly not in my position description. So I sort of learned how to help them by having the experience myself as an academic, and having done the PhD, knowing how great success feels and how awful failure feels. So I just learnt it on the go, on the fly, really. I work with a fantastic team. So Courtney, who I work with, she's also a research development manager. She's brilliant at what she does in the medical space. I'm in the non-medical. And together we come up with ways that we can help researchers. I think it's just being empathetic to researchers, listening to their problems, listening to their aspirations and helping them get there. I've certainly had no training in how to help people be resilient. It's something I've just tried to do along the way. I'm not sure how well I do it. I hope I do it well. I'm sure there's more I could do, though.
I'm sure you'd know in your feedback if you weren't doing a good job. Catherine, are you looking at the chat? Have you seen those questions? Do you want to raise those?
Yeah, sure. Sameda has questions about the grant workshops, about grant writing, or is it grant applications more so? Grant writing, of course, as well, Russ.
Sure, great question. So I run workshops for specific schemes, and because every scheme is so different, it's difficult to just do a general grant writing workshop. We have done them in the past, haven't run them specifically for a very general audience for a couple of years, simply because that's something we don't have time. But we do talk to researchers about what they want, and there is on our training and support webpage on request workshops which we run, and that can include general grant writing. So it's not something we do on a regular basis in a general sense, but it is something we certainly do for many of the major schemes. You're absolutely always welcome. Anybody from the university is welcome to come along to any of those. So if you have a look at our training and support webpage, you can see all the past workshops we've run over the last few years, and you can get access to slides and recordings. I think you can get access with student logins. If not, let me know. I can send you PDFs. And from that, you can sort of see what's on offer. And if things are coming up, you can see in the upcoming workshop section, if it's something you're interested in, absolutely, please come along. There's no RSVPs required. At the moment, everything's on Zoom, so there's no limits on how many people can come. And yeah, absolutely welcome.
Well, thanks, Ross. I've just posted the webpage. It's a really good, detailed webpage on all the training you offer there. And we have a question from Manami. Thank you for your insights. Do you have any tips on managing your workload when there's competing urgent deadlines?
Yeah, that's a day-to-day challenge. It's something you really do learn as you go, identifying what is a priority. So sometimes deadlines, so for example, this week, we've had a funder come back to us and say, we need some more information about these grants. We require you to improve on the statements on benefits to Australia. So, and they said, you've got 2 days to do it. And it comes to the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, which then passed on to myself and my manager. We are not able to communicate with the researcher themselves who was put in this grant because it's confidential, but we need to rewrite this whole section of the grant to convince the Minister for Education that this grant should be funded. And we have 2 days to do it. So you have to become an expert in a particular area very quickly and write something convincing that the Minister will believe is worthwhile. So sometimes deadlines are super short and they come out of nowhere. Sometimes you are going to know when they are. So the grant rounds generally stick to a fairly continuous cycle. The funding agencies are usually pretty good in giving us fair warning on when schemes will open and deadlines. So we can build that into our work plans. Working with other people in our teams, not just within research services, but also within faculty research officers who provide fantastic support, and making sure that those lines of communication are open. Building those relationships with people you work with are so important because it's times where you are under the pump that you can call them and say, hey, I've got a quick question for you. Can you give me a quick answer? Or, hey, I really need to get this done by the end of the week. Does anybody in your team have capacity to help me? So communication is always very important. Always talking to your manager if you're ever unsure about what is the most urgent, what should take the highest priority. I would always recommend having a chat with your manager.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so important having those relationships in the office, isn't it?
Yeah.
How did you manage during Zoom? I'm wondering. I have to say, I'm enjoying being back in some ways because I can literally walk around the corner and go knock on someone's door and go, oh, by the way, and you're meeting them in the kitchen. And
yeah.
Did you find it different, challenging? Are you doing a hybrid at the moment?
So I've been at home since March. I think I've been into the office about 3 or 4 times. I've really enjoyed working from home. So I live in the eastern suburbs, and it takes me about an hour to get to work each day on public transport. So there's 3 trains I don't have to catch each way. It's wonderful. But I do miss the interactions which you don't get. But every morning our team has a meeting for half an hour at 9:30 over Teams. And then we're always on Teams and email and phone calls. So all our calls are auto-directed to our mobiles from our desks. So it hasn't been a huge disruption for me. in supporting research, it hasn't been that difficult. I think Zoom has been absolutely wonderful in being able to do things like this, because it means more people can attend as well. If this was in person, some people would be on different sides of campus or not around that day. So actually attending these types of things, I think attendance has probably doubled from my experience, which is wonderful.
That is, yeah, I think we found the same as well, and across our team. Attendance is just so much easier if you know you can slot that into your diary. You're not factoring in the transport to get there and where's the room. It's all that's kind of taken out of your thinking. So yeah, it makes some things easier.
Yeah.
I have a question. You know, I've been working with PhDs for quite a number of years, like here and so on. And I remember one who's written a very nice recommendation, must say, on LinkedIn, because he was really struggling because he, you know, again, like you were saying, Ross, we see that still exists, sadly, that whole, if you're not going to be an academic, why are you doing a PhD? But, you know, he said in the end, he didn't like teaching and he didn't like writing grant applications. I went, well, you know, they're big parts of the job. So he's very happy working in the Office of Environment Heritage, loves it. But do you see a bit of that? And is there any way, I mean, you know, obviously you wouldn't tell people not to continue an academic career. That's always up to someone's own, you know, their own circumstances, their own choices. But, you know, do you see that where, you know, yes, you can build a thicker skin, but sometimes people just can't. And they just find that, you know, eventually becomes a little soul destroying. Do you see that where people go, that's the reason? Like, I like all the other things, but that's the reason. I just can't do this.
Look, to be honest, I haven't seen it in a severe case with anybody at Macquarie. To be honest, I'm a little surprised because of the pressures that researchers are under. I think it's really common for mentors or supervisors to think that if you have a career that's anything but an academic one, you're a failure. And that is something that I think is absolutely wrong. And the reason they come at it from that perspective is because that's all they've known. They went through this process and they've done nothing but a PhD and then an academic career. So that's all they know. So that's the only advice they can provide, which is fair enough. That's the only thing that they've experienced. So I think that's where the culture of if you don't get a postdoc, if you don't get an ongoing position, you're a failure. That's where it's come from, because that's sort of the pinnacle. That's what only the people who are successful can achieve. And that was something I struggled with. It was a reason why I tried to avoid thinking outside the box, because I didn't have a single role model who had done what I'd done. So I worked in the coral reef research area and temperate reef research area for over a decade, and I knew loads of people. Not a single one had dropped out of academia, and it always surprised me that either in academia or in sort of government roles where they would be working in policy, so like the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, for example. And that really surprised me. It's becoming more and more common because there's fewer and fewer jobs in academia. So I really was the first in the people that I work closely with and collaborated with to say, no, I've had enough, I'm leaving, I'm going to make a career change. And so that was tough for me. At the time I was concerned, what will people think? But since then, I've realised I've made the best decision leaving academia. It was wonderful why I did it, and I really enjoyed it. But realising there's other things out there and other things that are better suited to me has been wonderful. A 9-to-5 job without the major stresses, with wonderful people that you get to work with, still involved in research in some way. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
Totally. I have a few more questions, but I don't want to take over from any of our participants who might have some questions. I don't see anything else further in the chat, and I know we're just coming to finishing. Yes, I don't want to jump around too much, but I think you've covered a huge amount already, Ross. In terms of the funding and the direction of funding and impact, I suppose if we could maybe talk about that before we go. Huge amount of focus on impact and end users and things like that. Have you got any insights or perspectives on that you'd like to share?
Sure. So Impacts and benefits are getting bigger and bigger in academia, and funding agencies wanted to see more evidence of it. In the Australian perspective, that stemmed from the current Liberal government wanting to make sure that all research would have a benefit to the Australian community. So there's very specific guidelines on what is defined as a benefit to Australians' community, and it needs to fit either economic, commercial, social, cultural, or environmental benefits, and you need to make a convincing case for why. Excuse me. And so one of the things that's tricky in is, say you're an astrophysicist and you're looking at how stars form. How do you make that how do you make a convincing case for that having a benefit to the Australian community? It certainly invokes people's interest. Everybody's fascinated by space. You will have the opportunity to train the next research leaders in the discipline. But how will you have benefits to social, cultural, environmental, economic, or commercial parts of the Australian community? It's really hard to come up with arguments because you have to. And so there's some of the challenges we face. But identifying impacts. All researchers at all research levels, PhD students, will have impacts they probably haven't realised. And there's a fantastic new program that's recently been rolled out, all about impact and identifying what impacts you've had. So impact is not just, it's so many things that come under the banner of impact. It is so different depending on what discipline you work in. If you look at some simple metrics around publications, for example, an impact is how many citations the publications have had. It could be looking at who has cited your work. If it's a big leading institute overseas, and identifying that your work has been picked up by them and they're using your new method for their research, that's a massive impact. So you can go beyond the normal metrics of number of citations and H-index. There's altmetrics types of impact. There's impacts to policy and people who make decisions in government. Has your research somehow influenced that? So there's really a broad, huge diversity of evidence of impact. And if you're interested, I'd suggest checking out those impact workshops, which I think are coming up sometime soon.
Yes, that's great. I'm glad you mentioned that. There's the incubator program, I think it is the impact program, and they're allowing HDR candidates to be involved as well. So you'll be with ECRs, existing researchers, and HDRs will be in there as well. And then there's also our own program, which is, you may have heard through your own faculty, it's the MQ HDR Engage program, which is looking at how you develop your skills and listening and pitching and talking about your research and knowing how to engage with external stakeholders. So if you haven't heard from your faculty already about that, we have sent them an email this week saying that applications are open. There will be actually an email directly to you as well. And if you want to know directly from us, you're more than welcome to contact us. We'll actually follow up with the details to the attendees of this particular recording as well.
I do know, very limited. There's only 12 places. It is
limited, yeah. For our program, it's 12. I think the incubator one is a bit wider. I think they might have, which I'm not too sure of the number, but yeah, good point, Sally. And we might leave it at that. Unless there's any other questions, I don't see anything else in the chat. But thanks, Ross. Again, it was awesome. Really loved your presentation. Some thank yous coming in here from our attendees. We'll be sure to share this recording, hopefully in a bit more of a timely fashion than I have before. But thanks again, and have everybody a great day, and we'll touch with you again, Ross.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
Thanks very much.
Very, very interesting, and you know, and again, just thanks. Put in the note that every July you guys run this particular one for PhD.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll happen again next year. I know it's
of course. Yep.
A while away, but yeah. Thank you.
Thanks again. Lovely to see you too.
Okay,
all the best.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.